So yes, Disney Star Wars trilogy was absolute shit and we all know it. But why was it so shit? You've probably heard a million reviews on it at this point, but in this video I'm going to add my own unique thoughts on what made it so bad and how it could have been so much better. Before I start, please subscribe and like if you would like more content like this. I have to admit, at the time when the Disney Star Wars trilogy came out, I actually enjoyed The Force Awakens. I really enjoyed The Rise of Skywalker, but at the same time I left them knowing I hadn't watched stories that really made sense, and I knew those stories wouldn't live with me like the first 6 movies did. The Force Awakens was a movie that had flaws but felt like it was setting us up for something epic that we could have all loved. If episode 8 and 9 were any good, then The Force Awakens could have appeared to be a good movie in hindsight. Often this is the case with trilogy movies. You can't decide if the individual movies are great until you see them all work together. If the final movie suitably wraps up the whole story and ties all the movies together, then in hindsight the first 2 movies will look good. But in the case of Disney Star Wars, The Last Jedi pisses all over The Force Awakens, and then The Rise of Skywalker pisses all over The Last Jedi, and all 3 piss all over the first 6 films. This lack of congruency and seeming lack of a concrete plan or respect for the underlying franchise led to a trilogy that had some promise but ended up being really shit. Before we look at why Disney Star Wars trilogy was so shit, let's begin by looking at what made the original so fantastic, and then we'll be able to contrast them with the new shit Star Wars. The original Star Wars trilogy had so many elements that make a great story, and it followed the traditional hero's journey where a character is living a normal life, then they find a mentor that pulls them out of that life, they go on a fantastic journey, and eventually they return home but as a changed person. The story of the original Star Wars trilogy centers around a young, average farm boy called Luke Skywalker. Luke is someone that we can all relate with. They're living an average life, but they feel there's something more for them out there. We are dropped right into the middle of this story and we are just discovering this mysterious world with Luke. The galaxy Luke lives in is controlled by a tyrannical empire that has devastating weaponry and is led by an incredibly threatening and mysterious masked figure known as Darth Vader. And Darth Vader is just the henchman of someone who is even more threatening, more mysterious and more menacing, and this is his leader known only as the Emperor. Luke's journey begins when he meets a mentor called Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan once knew his father before he was murdered by Darth Vader. Obi-Wan teaches Luke about a magical energy that he can control, which is known as the Force. Luke must learn to harness this magical energy and use it to take down the all-powerful Empire, the evil Darth Vader, and his supremely powerful leader, the Emperor, and restore peace and happiness to the galaxy. Luke embarks on an incredible journey across the galaxy where he goes from being a clumsy, undisciplined child to a powerful wielder of the Force. In the process, he learns about the galaxy in which he lives. He witnesses the might and cruelty of the Empire. He sees many people die. He makes many friends. He learns about his own history and his family's history. He finds that he has a sister. He discovers that the hideously deformed half-man, half-machine known as Darth Vader is in fact his father. He manages to find the good in his father and saves him from the true evil of the story, the Emperor. Together with his redeemed father, he manages to defeat the Emperor, and then he watches his father peacefully die. With the Emperor dead, the galaxy is now free from the Empire. Everyone in the galaxy celebrates, and Luke returns home as a hero, grown from a boy to a man. This story has all the classic elements needed to make it great. A relatable hero, a seemingly undefeatable enemy, an incredible journey, and a victory that seems real and doesn't feel forced. The Disney Star Wars trilogy starts off on a similar path. We are introduced to Rey, who is the Luke of this story. Rey lives alone on a planet with no family, and she is the character that the audience can relate to. Then we are introduced to Kylo Ren, the masked villain of this story, and they are certainly an imposing figure initially. Then we find that Kylo Ren is led by an even more powerful, mysterious, deformed being called Snoke, and together they are seeking to control the galaxy through their new military force known as the First Order, which has risen up from the ashes of the Empire. Initially, the story setup is quite exciting because there is a lot of mystery. Where have Luke and his allies gone? Who is Rey and where are her family? What journey of discovery will Rey have to go on, and who will lead her in her quest? Who is Kylo Ren, and why does he wear a mask? Who is Snoke? Why is he deformed? And where did this mysterious evil combination come from? And when we eventually see Luke, what will he be like? Will he have become more powerful than all the Force users that have come before him? Then very quickly, the writers just piss over everything that they had set up so well. Rey turns out to not struggle with any challenges. She is instantly able to do everything better than any past Star Wars character ever could. Instantly, she can fly ships perfectly. Instantly, she can use the Force better than anyone ever without any training. Instantly, she defeats her main enemy, Kylo Ren, and she never truly feels like she is up against the odds like Luke felt in the original movies. And within moments of the film starting, they ruin Kylo Ren's mystery by removing his mask, and it just turns out that he is a petulant and pathetic individual. Then in the second movie, we learn that Luke has become a depressed and pathetic old man, which we will touch on more later in this video, but it's just so annoying the way they handled Luke. Snoke is revealed as an overpowered cartoon-looking character who is quickly killed without posing much threat, and by the time we get to the end of the second movie, we are in a situation where Rey, the hero of the story, seems like she can overcome anything. The big bad of the story, Snoke, has been killed already, and the only evil left is the petulant, unthreatening Kylo Ren, who has already been defeated by Rey. I remember leaving the cinema at the end of The Last Jedi and feeling a bit empty and confused. I was wondering, where is this all going? What really needs to be achieved in this last movie? The only evil left had already been defeated, so the final movie should just be easy. It gave me a similar feeling that you get when a sports team you're watching has built up an insurmountable lead in a game and you realise there isn't a lot to play for, and you just stare blankly at the screen but you're not really engaged anymore. Now, contrast this with the end of The Empire Strikes Back in the original trilogy. That film ended with Luke just having his arse kicked and his hand chopped off by Darth Vader. The Empire seemed more dangerous than ever at this point. Luke had just found out that his father was Darth Vader, and there's the very real threat that his father could turn him evil as well. And there is still the Emperor, a being we know very little about, but we know they are threatening enough that the all-powerful Darth Vader is scared of them and controlled by them. So there's a really, really good setup for the next film that gets you excited about watching the next film, and you feel you have to see it. How is Luke going to overcome those odds? Contrast this with the end of The Last Jedi. You leave that movie feeling like the good guys already have all they need to win the battle and the last film will just be a formality. So then we move on to The Rise of Skywalker. And when The Rise of Skywalker begins, there is a slow, dark build-up, which was admittedly pretty cool. And then we learn the Emperor from the 6 films has returned from the dead and has been shoehorned into this film just to raise the stake. And obviously this was because of all the backlash from the fans. This is one of the most hated things about the Disney Star Wars trilogy. They just randomly bring back the big bad from the first 6 Star Wars movies. And the Emperor's return leads to one of the most hated lines in all of Star Wars lore.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Now, I actually don't have a problem with this line as much as other people do, because the rest of the movie does hint at how the Emperor returned, and it was a big part of the previous movies that the Emperor was trying to cheat death. So it makes sense, and it feels like a suitable end to his character arc that he found out a way to cheat death, and these films are showing just how powerful he was, that he managed to do it, and that seems like the arc that was being set out in the first 6 films. So it does make sense from my point of view. And then all the extra material like books, cartoons, comics that are based around the Star Wars universe have been filling in the holes on how the Emperor returned from the dead ever since. And I think it was a cool idea that Snoke was a botched clone that the First Order had worked on, and they were still looking for a good clone body for the Emperor to inhabit. So that makes sense to me as well. My issues with the return of the Emperor was just how poor the execution was. The Emperor just came back as this ridiculously overpowered individual for one movie, and then by the end of the movie, they were dead again. What was the point of bringing them back if they were just going to kill them off again straight away? The Emperor never felt like this incredible threat that the good guys wouldn't be able to defeat. It just felt like this ridiculous, slightly comical theatre villain. And it was so obviously just a cash grab by Disney just to raise the stakes and keep the audience interested. But what if they had brought the Emperor back in the right way? it could have been so cool. It could have been so epic if they did it correctly. It would have instantly made The Last Jedi a way better film if it ended with the scene revealing the Emperor was alive. Could you imagine if that scene at the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker was actually at the end of The Last Jedi, and you realised this was actually the plan that Disney had all along? That would set up The Rise of Skywalker as a really exciting film. But instead, they didn't even reveal it in The Rise of Skywalker. They actually revealed that the Emperor was back in the trailers for The Rise of Skywalker. So they didn't even give us that joy of watching The Rise of Skywalker and getting excited at the start of it. We already knew from the trailers and all the marketing before the film that the Emperor was coming back. Now, secondly, what if they didn't kill off the Emperor in The Rise of Skywalker? What if The Rise of Skywalker ended with the Emperor still alive and only their minions defeated, so the threat of the Emperor would still exist and set up a future trilogy? They could have shown the true horror of the Emperor. They could have shown that they achieved the ability to defeat death, and that they could have maybe made them into an even darker threat, one that kills several main characters and possibly seriously injures Rey. Instead, they just killed the Emperor off as quickly as they had returned, which just turned it into a case of, oh, he's alive again and now he's dead again, and possibly he could come back again in the future. It just removes any stakes and turned the Emperor into this pathetic plot device that can just return and die over and over again. But the thing that Disney Star Wars really fucked up, and this is the part that I have the biggest issue with as a huge Star Wars fan, and I think this was the part that was the easiest for them to not fuck up. But the part that they fucked up the absolute most was how they handled the classic Star Wars characters and how it introduced all the new characters. This story is, after all, the story of the Skywalkers. That's why this is episode 7, 8 and 9. It's continuing on with the first 6 films, which are the story of the Skywalkers and the story of the Emperor. And although there can be many more Star Wars films that handle many different areas of the Star Wars universe, any movie with Skywalkers in it had to centre around their story and wrap up their story. This final trilogy was the opportunity for a storyteller, and a good storyteller, which unfortunately did not exist. It was their chance to show us how the Skywalker story ends. It was a chance for us to say goodbye to the characters we love as they go on their final adventure, and for us to see how much they have grown over time. And while the story was being told, it was also a great opportunity to introduce some new characters that could start a different story in the future and that we could grow to love over time. But instead, we were introduced to all the old characters that we loved, but something was different and didn't seem right about them. They were all depressed and unhappy. These once hopeful, vibrant, energetic characters had all the life and spirit ripped out of them. Although these characters looked the same, you could tell that something wasn't right about their arcs as characters. The lesson that this movie taught us was that once you get older, you give up hope in life and everything you worked for falls apart and then you die. It feels like a very ageist plot for a company that claims to be so progressive. At the same time as we were introduced to these shadows of former characters that we once used to know and love, we also get introduced to the trendy new characters that are designed to replace them. Now, of course, I completely accept that there has to be a new wave of characters, but the disrespectful and clumsy way that Disney introduces them and just disregards the classic characters that we grew up with is just ridiculous, and it just ruined the movies. Disney tells us that these new characters are the ones that we should love and admire, and forget those other silly characters that we've spent 6 films building these relationships with. These new characters can do everything that they can do, and they can do it way better. It isn't that any of these new characters like Rey, Finn or Poe are actually bad characters. They're good characters. They're just introduced terribly and given really poor story arcs. The film insists that we like these characters without giving us any good reason. And you know what it reminds me of? Have you ever met up with your friends that you've known for a long time, and one of them brings someone that you don't know with them, or your whole group of friends doesn't know, and this new person, instead of being quiet and sitting back and realising that they aren't the centre of attention, they just dominate the conversation and act overly familiar with everyone. They don't realise that since they are the new person, they initially aren't going to be everyone's favourite person. they're going to have to take time to get accepted by the group and get accepted by everyone. Well, the exact same thing happens with Disney Star Wars. We all went to see these movies because we wanted to see the characters that we know and love, because they're like our friends that we know from the past. But every time they are on screen and we are getting a chance to reconnect with them, one of the new characters butts in and they're all like, look at me, I'm your new favourite person. While at the same time, these new characters aren't going through the trials and tribulations that we need them to go through to build that emotional connection with them. One of the most moving moments in all of the Disney Star Wars trilogy happens in The Last Jedi, when Yoda appears as Luke is planning on destroying all the old Jedi texts. Now, this scene is still flawed in one sense, since Luke's character is a bumbling fool, and at this point in their arc, they really shouldn't be this pathetic. But this scene still is moving because you can feel that connection between two old friends saying hello without some new character butting in. And this scene really has the magic of Star Wars in it. And it really shows me what these Star Wars films could have been if Disney just stayed true to the source material. So Rey is probably the most annoying new character in the Disney Star Wars trilogy. Not because she is badly acted, Daisy Ridley actually does a great job of acting this part. And not because she is a bad character, Rey has the potential to be a great character that we can get behind. But the issue is that the writers don't want to give her any difficult situations to overcome. She is so overpowered that she can do so many things with the Force that no other character before her could do, which just makes it seem like all the older characters were pathetic. You remember Luke had so many trials and tribulations he had to go through. He couldn't do anything at the start. He failed so much. He was kind of embarrassing at the start when he was learning how to use the Force. Rey can just instantly use the Force to an incredible level without being taught anything by anyone. And why is it that Rey is so overpowered? Well, it seems to come down to this fascination that Disney and most of Hollywood seems to have right now with making women unbreakably superior to men. It is a really strange thing that is popping up in all movies these days. And I'm not like 100% against this. Yes, I agree that women have been underappreciated and mistreated in the world in the past, and still they face a lot of difficulties in the world today. And yes, I'm 100% for having strong female role models in films and strong female characters in movies today. I think this is a really, really good thing, and I'm happy to see it in movies. But these characters still need to make sense. They need to be well written. They need to fit the flow of a story, and they need to be believable. But Disney Star Wars feels like it had to hit some weird feminism quota while being made, and they based their movie decisions on this rather than what felt natural for the story. Why did Disney do this? Is it because they are evil? Is it because they are run by a messed up woman called Kathleen Kennedy? Is it because they hate men? No, although these are all popular theories that you'll hear out there, I personally don't think that these are the reasons for Disney's failures. I'm sure Kathleen Kennedy is a really nice person. I'm sure Disney are a good company with good intentions that wants to do good things. And I'm sure one person doesn't have complete control over the direction of a whole company. I think the failure is for a bigger reason. When the original Star Wars trilogy came out, it was written and directed by George Lucas, who had spent his whole young life coming up with the idea for these movies. These movies were like his child. And of course, I'm sure he wanted to be rich and famous, but I think the story is what mattered to him most. Then he made the prequel trilogy, and these movies weren't so great, but the story was still fantastic. And I think the issue with the prequel trilogy was that George Lucas wanted to push the boundaries of how movies look, so the whole trilogy was made using mostly green screens, which was very unnatural for the actors, and that made their dialogue awful and clunky. And the whole thing just felt a little soulless, but that was mainly because of the natural feeling that the CGI created. But the story was still brilliant, and it still kept that arc going, and it felt emotionally invested in the whole story. Now fast forward to Disney Star Wars, and all the ingredients are there. The films look fantastic, the actors are all great in their roles, and should have been brilliant. But the problem with these films is that they weren't made by one person working on something they loved. These films were instead made by a company with the primary purpose being to make a profit. One person wasn't solely responsible for these movies. A team of people were. They used inputs on current trends, they researched what was popular now, they made decisions that they thought would lead to the longevity of the franchise so they could pump out more and more sequels with the new characters. One writer would write one part of the movie, another would write another part, then the company would have a meeting. In those meetings, people would say, we need to include more things that appeal to a Chinese market. We need to include more things that appeal to a LGBTQ market. We need more things for the feminist market. And all these bits and pieces were added to the story, and all these bits and pieces felt unnatural. In fact, there were probably political elements involved in the making of Disney Star Wars. For a massive company like Disney, there probably are government directives in place to say that they need to have more diversity in their movies, they need to be more inclusive in their movies. None of these elements are bad, by the way. I'm all for all of them. It's great to have more diversity in movies. It's great to have underrepresented people represented more in these movies. But the problem is when you try to force these elements into a movie rather than making them feel natural. And unfortunately, Disney tried to fit all of these elements into their Star Wars movies and ended up with something that felt completely unnatural, forced, and didn't really make sense. It could have been amazing, and for some small moments in these movies, you felt what it could have been. You felt that bit of magic. But unfortunately, they fucked it up and they didn't give the characters that we loved the ending that they deserve.